I was 7 years old when I first walked through those gates. 7 years old, and the noise hit me like a wall. Not like anything I had heard before. Not the noise of the street, not the noise of the market, not the noise of my father shouting, which was considerable. This was a noise that had no gaps in it. It was continuous and total, and it did not care whether you were there or not. My name is Thomas Henry Birch. I was born on the 2nd of March, 1857, in Preston, Lancashire, in a court of back-to-back houses off Friargate that smelled of coal smoke and midden, and the particular damp that settles into stone walls that never fully dry. My father worked the mills. My mother had worked the mills before her marriage and returned to them after it, because there was no way to feed 5 children on 1 mill wage, and everyone in the court understood that, without needing to say it. My older brother Joseph went into the mill at 6. I went at 7. My sister Ellen went at 8. That was the sequence of it. That was the order of things. I want to tell you what it was like, because the people who lived it are gone, and the people who write about it were not there. And there is a difference between those two kinds of knowledge that I have spent my whole life noticing. The mill we worked was a cotton spinning mill on the north side of Preston. 6 floors of red brick and iron windows that admitted a gray light in the mornings and almost no light by the afternoon in winter. The floors were wooden, and they vibrated continuously from the machinery. The air was full of cotton dust, the fine, fibrous dust that came off the raw cotton during the carding and spinning processes, and it hung in the light from the windows like a kind of indoor weather. You breathed it all day. You coughed it up at night. The older workers, the ones who had been there 20 and 30 years, had a particular cough that everyone recognized, a deep and rattling thing that told you something about what a life in those rooms eventually did to a person's chest. I was a scavenger in the beginning. That was the name for the youngest children, the ones small enough to crawl under the running machines and collect the waste cotton that accumulated on the floor beneath the spinning frames. You waited for a moment when the overlooker was not watching, and you went under. The frames did not stop while you were under them. The machinery continued. You moved quickly, and you stayed low, and you did not let your fingers get where they should not be, because if you did, you lost the finger or worse. And there was no compensation and no apology and no particular surprise from anyone, because it happened, and everyone knew it happened, and the speed of the machine was more important than the finger of a 7-year-old boy from a court off Friargate. I kept all my fingers. I want to say that plainly before I continue, because I know that is what people wonder when they hear this kind of account. I kept all my fingers and both hands and came through physically more or less whole, which puts me among the fortunate ones, and I know it. The overlooker on our floor was a man named Griggs. I have thought about Griggs many times over the years, tried to construct a fair account of him in my mind, tried to find the balance between what he was and what the position required him to be. He was not a cruel man in the way that some men are cruel, which is to say he did not seem to enjoy the hitting, but he hit. A strap across the back of the legs for falling asleep, which happened because the hours were long and the children were children. A cuff to the ear for inattention. A harder blow for anything he categorized as deliberate misbehavior, which was a category he defined broadly and inconsistently depending on his own condition on a given morning. I was hit perhaps twice a week on average, across the first 2 years. I say on average because there were weeks with no blows and weeks with more, and the determining factor was not primarily my own conduct, but Griggs's temper, which was connected to things entirely outside the mill: his wife, his drinking, the state of his digestion, the mood of the manager above him, the mood of the owner above the manager. We were at the bottom of a long chain of pressure, and pressure always finds the bottom. I did not hate Griggs. I want to be honest about that. I feared him, and I resented him, and I was sometimes so tired and in such pain from standing on the stone floor all day that I thought about him with something close to hatred on the walk home at night. But I understood, even then, even at 8, 9, and 10 years old, that Griggs was not the source. Griggs was a mechanism. The source was somewhere else, in offices I had never seen, and in ledgers I could not read, and in the decisions of men whose names I did not know. My mother knew I was being hit. She knew because she had been hit herself, in that same mill, 15 years before. And she knew what the marks looked like, and she knew what the particular way of moving meant when your legs had taken the strap. She did not go to Griggs. She did not go to the manager. She could not. To go to the manager was to lose the position, and to lose the position was to lose the wage. And the wage was not supplementary. The wage was necessary in a way that left no room for the dignity of complaint. She put her hand on my head some mornings before I left. That was all. She put her hand on my head, and then she went to get her own coat and her own shawl, and she went to the same mill by a different gate, and we spent the day 30 yards apart without seeing each other, and we walked home together in the evening in the dark. I think about those walks home in the dark. November and December in Preston, the gas lamps just coming on, the streets full of mill workers all moving in the same direction, the collective sound of clogs on cobblestone that you could hear from 2 streets away. My mother's hand sometimes in mine when she was not too tired, which was not always. The smell of coal fires starting up in the courts as the workers came home. The particular quality of exhaustion in my body at the end of those days, which was a complete exhaustion, nothing held in reserve. The kind of tired that a child should not know, but that a child in those rooms knew every evening. There was a boy named Matthew Holt who worked alongside me in the first years. He was a year older than me and small for his age, and he had a way of making things funny that I have never encountered in quite the same form in anyone since. Not jokes exactly, observations. He would look at something that was miserable and find the precise angle from which it became absurd, and he would say one quiet sentence in your ear, and you would have to turn away from Griggs so he would not see you laughing. That capacity to find the absurdity inside the misery was a survival tool as real as any other, more real than most actually, because it cost nothing and it was always available, and Griggs could not take it away. Matthew Holt was dead by the time he was 19. A fever in the winter of 1876. He had been working in the mill for 12 years by then, and his chest was already not good, and the fever found him without much resistance. I went to the burial. There were not many people there. His mother and his younger sister and 3 or 4 men from the floor and me. It was a cold morning in February, and the ground was hard, and the whole thing was over in 20 minutes. I have never forgotten him. I will not forget him now. By the time I was 12, I had moved up from scavenging to piecing. A piecer's job was to rejoin the broken threads on the spinning frames, moving continuously along the length of the machine, watching for breaks, reaching in and piecing the thread back together with a twist of the fingers that took weeks to learn and became entirely automatic after a few months. Your fingers learned it separately from your mind. Your mind could be somewhere else entirely, and often was, while your fingers did the work. The somewhere else that my mind went was words. I had learned to read from a Sunday school teacher named Mrs. Earnshaw, who held classes on Sunday afternoons in the vestry of a church on the edge of the Mill District, and who taught with a patience and a seriousness that I have spent my whole life trying to honor. She was perhaps 40 years old. She had a gray shawl she wore every Sunday, regardless of season. She spoke to us as though what we were learning mattered, which was not an attitude I encountered frequently in those years, and the effect of that attitude on a 10-year-old boy from a court off Friargate was considerable. I learned to read in 8 months, not fluently. Fluency came later, came over years, but sufficiently to get at what was on the page, to understand that the marks meant something and that the something was accessible to me. That knowledge changed the shape of my life in a way I cannot fully measure. It did not change the mill. The mill was the same, Griggs was the same, the cotton fly was the same, and the stone floor was the same, and the exhaustion at the end of the day was the same. But I had a place to go inside my own head that had not existed before, and the existence of that place made everything around it more bearable. I took books from Mrs. Earnshaw when she offered them, which she sometimes did when she had something she thought a particular child should read. She gave me a copy of Robinson Crusoe in the winter of 1869 when I was 12 years old, and I read it over the course of 3 weeks in every spare minute I could find, including by the light of the fire, after my parents were asleep, sitting close enough to the coals to see the page. My mother found me doing this once and said nothing except to tell me not to burn myself, and then went back to bed. I want to tell you about the other children I worked alongside, because I think they are owed that. Not all of them. There were hundreds of children in that mill over the years, and I did not know them all, and many of their names are gone from me, but some of them. There was a girl named Clara who was 8 years old when I was 11 and who cried every morning for the first 3 weeks, and then stopped crying, and after that never cried again, not that I saw. There was a boy named Amos who had a badly set broken arm from an earlier accident, and who could not fully extend it, but who had adapted his work so completely around the limitation that most people on the floor did not know about it. There was a girl named Ruth, whose mother also worked the floor, the way my mother did, and Ruth and I had an unspoken understanding about that, about what it meant to have your mother close enough to see and not close enough to reach, all day, every day. The hours were 12 hours in summer, and however many there was light for in winter, which was sometimes more. I know the law said otherwise. By that point in the 1860s, the law had been saying otherwise for some years, but the law was interpreted loosely and enforced lightly, and the children in that mill worked the hours the mill required them to work. The parents of those children worked the same hours and could not be at the school board or the magistrate's office while they were on the floor, and the magistrate was not, in any case, a frequent visitor to the courts off Friargate. I left the mill at 19. I left it by becoming something else inside it first. Moved from piecing to spinning, from spinning to a position that involved some oversight of the machines rather than only serving them. I left completely in 1876 when I found work as a clerk for a merchant in the town, a position I owe entirely to Mrs. Earnshaw's Sunday afternoons and Robinson Crusoe by firelight and the 10 years of reading that followed. I went back to that mill once in 1902. I was 45 years old. I went back because I wanted to see it with the eyes of a man rather than the eyes of a child, and because I thought it might clarify something in me that had never been fully clear. It did not clarify anything. It was smaller than I remembered, which I had expected. But the noise was exactly the same. Exactly the same. After 26 years away, I walked through those gates, and the noise hit me, the way it had hit me the first morning, and for a moment I was 7 years old again, and the moment lasted longer than I would have liked. I did not stay long. I walked back out through the gates and into the street, and I stood there for a while, in the ordinary sounds of an ordinary day, and I thought about Matthew Holt, who had found the absurdity inside the misery, and about Mrs. Earnshaw in her gray shawl, and about my mother's hand on my head in the mornings before she put on her coat. None of those people made the mill what it was. None of them chose it, or designed it, or profited from it. They only endured it, each in their own way, and passed through it, and came out the other side changed by it, in ways they could not always name. I am one of the ones who came out. I have not forgotten what it cost to come out, and I have not forgotten the ones who did not.